Good afternoon. I'll be dwelling on ICT enabled pedagogy, and I'll also present some of my thoughts on teaching practices, and I believe in the process a lot of the things that Professor Pathak has said will be supplemented. So let's start with this person. He is anybody recognizes him? This gentleman over here. He is George Bernard Shaw. Okay, and this person, in his book Man and Superman, Maxims for Evolutionists, said, "He who can does, and he who cannot teaches." I often extend it with another line, "He who cannot teach the teachers." Sometimes that's what we do often when I go to lecture the teachers. Sometimes I feel humbled by that. So here is a gentleman. How many of you can recognize him? He is Socrates. Okay, when we talk of pedagogy, we have got no other way but to start with him, 399 BC. And his pedagogy, the way he taught, is completely different from what we are accustomed today. He used to take up discussions, dialogues with his students as the mode of teaching. He used to go around with his students. The students used to ask questions, and he didn't give answers. He in return also asked the students some questions, and that made the students think, and the process went on, and that's the way he used to teach. And to him, the maxim was that knowledge is for moral good. Now this thought that knowledge is basically for moral good won't allow a person to live for long, and so he was presented or gifted with the poison hemlock, and Socrates was killed. And this after Socrates, the gentleman on this side is Aristotle, Socrates' student. And Aristotle actually introduced the pedagogy of lectures, which Professor Pathak was criticizing, and that is a traditional thing that was going on, that was introduced by Aristotle. And Aristotle, of course, now pure lectures may be not that effective, but at that time lecture was the main means of education. And there are some very interesting things that Aristotle used to say. He used to say, a teacher teaches, a good teacher explains, and an excellent teacher inspires. Okay? And that tells a lot, the role of a real teacher, what it should be. Now, given this, when we come to the technology enabled environment, what are we heading at? What are the things that are happening? We have moved from low technology to high technology. We have moved from the chalk and talk mode of classroom teaching to smart classrooms. And in smart classrooms, we have projectors. We have got writing boards on which we write, and the thing get projected. We have got clickers. We have got digital boards where whatever we write are recorded and the students need not take notes, and all these things can come up. Another feature of this technology enabled learning is ubiquity. Ubiquity means learn anywhere. Wherever you go, you can learn. So, the process for that, you need not be in the classroom all the time. You can move around with your mobile, with your tablets, and you can access the learning material from anywhere. And also another thing that this technology enhancement or technology enablement is causing is that we are now getting an access to a repository of learning objects. The learning objects can be made at NIT Rourkela. The learning objects can be made at IIT Kharagpur or IIT Bombay. The learning objects can be made at MIT, but it really doesn't matter where we are being able to get the access to the pieces of knowledge, course contents. I am a little hesitant in using the term knowledge right now. We get to the course content, and from there we try to acquire knowledge. But at this point, I'd like to draw the line. Up to this, we have all seen, and the inauguration of today's center, the center that has been inaugurated today, probably has got plans up to this. All these things are being covered in NPTEL, all other things that we are doing. MOOC I am coming a little later because here probably MOOC can cause a bridge. I want to put in a couple of things here which I feel should be included in technology enabled learning. Professor Phatak was saying, talking of the silos, a mechanical engineering student would say, why do I need to learn chemistry? An electronics engineer student will say, why do I need to know history? That's where I object, and I'll bring in a even more challenge which I am sure will shock the students. That is, you have to understand the student, and understanding a student means understanding his psychology, understanding his cognitive ability, understanding his sociological placements. So, a real tool that will be effective for education must address not only the content, but the pedagogy. That is, what is pedagogy, by the way? We often use the term. Can anybody volunteer? Pedagogy is basically the art and science of teaching, how you deliver the material. Pedagogues were the people historically, and actually it is art and science of teaching the children, it was originally. And the pedagogues were the people who used to take the children of the elite class to the schools, like the rickshaw pullers, the van rickshaw people, like that. From there, so that was the first step in education. Unless you go to the guru's place, you can't learn. So, pedagogy is basically the art and science of teaching, and in order to achieve that, you have to learn the psychology and sociological aspects of the students. And another thing that is technology can certainly provide, with more and more use of MOOCs and other technology enabled things we can come to, is testing and data analysis. Unfortunately, in a country like India, where there is a scope of a large amount of data, India is suffering severely for the paucity of educational data. We make the policies based on census and some survey report, which is very superficial and does not reflect the reality most of the time. The other important thing that I'd like to emphasize on is adaptation. Unless a teaching method can adapt to the necessity of the students, then that education mechanism will fail. We cannot, to me, I do not consider any student to be a good student or a bad student. A student is born, a student is a human being with some acumen in some aspect, in some acumen in some other aspect. Typically in an Indian society, who is a good student in the school? He is a very good student. When we say he is a very good student, mostly when he is good at maths. But there may be a student who is not good at maths, but he can interpret, he is very good in literature. If we say he is good in literature, but he is a very good student, the one who is good at maths, that is a psychological barrier. So, what is the strength of the student? That we need to know, and accordingly we have to adapt. So, access to learning objects, there are different forms of learning objects. There can be presentations like PowerPoint presentations, animations, simulations, videos, narrative, games, quizzes. Now, which of these are to be selected for communicating a course content to somebody? And will it be monolith that for this class, I will be teaching this only through PowerPoint presentation, or I will just give an animation, and that is for all? Think of, I mean, if you just think for the school level, there are number of children who are little bit, who suffer from attention deficit, who cannot really focus on the attention, right, focus on the content. Now, think of that you are presenting him with a PowerPoint slide with a lot of zoom in, zoom out, etc. He will be totally lost. But often that is, such animations are assumed to be a good means of capturing attention. But what about the child who is suffering from attention deficit? Can we adapt to that? Do you know what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of the student? With the proper application of technology, we can do that. And for that, what type of presentation? Because often you will find that if I teach with too many examples, it may be very beneficial for some segment of the students. But some bright students who can pick up, bright means one aspect of cognition, comprehending power. That is not the only parameter. So, somebody will read a piece and can comprehend it quickly, and if I just go on giving examples, he will, at least when I am in the dais, our teaching system is that of a power structure. The teacher stands on a rostrum and the students sit down, and whatever I say from here is Vedas and whatever you say is wrong. That is the power structure we have imbibed in. So, even if I go on giving example, that student who has already understood the thing can feel bored, but he cannot tell me because I will give him less marks if he disturbs my class. You understand? So, but for another student, might be that this example based teaching would be very beneficial. Therefore, the learning objects need to be annotated with the style of teaching. These are known as learning styles that the students are more familiar or more attracted to. What happened? Okay. Now, herein I bring in a couple of words: cognition, computing and education. I would like to say that cognition plays a major role, and since the technology enabled learning that we are talking of now is essentially ICT based, we cannot escape computing. But you can say, where does, again you being a professor of computer science, is dragging in computer anywhere and everywhere. Why should it be? Let us see why. I am not talking of computing in terms of number crunching only. Okay. So, when we look at cognition, what we really want to do is, I am trying to find a relationship between cognition and education. Now, when I talk of cognition, a student, anybody, adult, young, child, whatever it might be, there are some cognitive parameters with each of us, all of us have got that, That is the memory. We have got three types of memory: sensory memory, with which we see, feel, whatever. There is a short term memory and there is a long term memory. And in short term memory, the capacity of the short term memory is less, but, and we suppose you give me a telephone number and you ask me to go to the next building and dial the phone from there. What I will do? I will walk over there, and in the meanwhile I will rehearse those 10-digit number and try to keep that in mind, because unless I rehearse, that will vanish by the time I reach there. But if the telephone number is very important and I have to call that thrice a day, that will gradually percolate into my long term memory, and that is where we actually retain the things. Now, this capacity of long term memory, the amount of rehearsal required, the short term memory capacity vary with people. This is a biological fact. What are we normalizing through IIT JEE? We are just trying to capture the students who are the best. Best in what aspect? Did we measure? Is it their rote learning? Is it their memorization? Is it their analytical ability? Is it their sensitivity? Did you ever? Can you show me one IIT JEE or whatever AIEEE question which measures the sensitivity aspect of intelligence among the students? None. We do not think that is important, and we feel that the students will contribute greatly to the nation. That is an oxymoron. That is not possible. So, here the memory, sensory, short term and long term will vary with people. The attention capacity of the students vary. The understanding, reasoning and expression, language, as you know, language, there are two parts of the brain which we get since our birth. One is the Broca's area and there is the Wernicke's area. Broca's area helps us to understand, comprehend language, and Wernicke's area helps us in producing language. It may be that some student is understanding it properly, but somehow because of the weakness of the Wernicke's area, he is not being able to reproduce it properly. Don't we need to take that into account, that this student has really understood but is not being able to express? We simply brand him. In the exam he could not write, so he does not know. That is why I was hesitant to use the term knowledge. How can we brand that the student does not know? He is not just not being able to express. That these are the cognitive aspects. On the other hand, in education, what we want to do is we want to decide on the content, what to teach. We decide on the pedagogy, how to teach, what to evaluate and how to evaluate. Now, if I want to build a bridge among the cognition parameters and deciding on what to teach and how to teach based on the cognitive parameters of the student, I need some computing. And that is, what is computing in general parlance? Computing means we deal with data, right? All of us know that. We do some analysis. We do some classification, we do some synthesis, we do reasoning, problem solving, decision support, prediction, etc. That is all what, there must be some computer science faculty here. Are there any? That is what we do. It is not only number crunching. And this analysis, and that we do all the time mentally. Those of you, anybody who is a humanities teacher here, don't you do this? When you talk to your student, don't you classify the lecture material that this is a difficult one, this is an easy one? Don't you classify the students that he is lagging behind right now in this, he is advanced? We do that. And that computing we are doing in the mind For that computing, you need not be a computer scientist. We the human beings are always doing that computing. And when we do that, along with this, so these we need in order to decide on, here is a complicated diagram, but please hold on with me for a second. We need to take into account quite a few things. The student's state with respect to the cognitive parameters. I just now mentioned some cognitive parameters like attention, memory, language capability, etc. The cognitive classification of the contents. A particular content has been given. How difficult is that content? How readable is the content? There has been research in readability of texts in English in US. In India, it has just started. We have started doing that. I will just give you an interesting anecdote. US, you know, everything starts there with war. Unless there is a war, US is just like us. Whenever there is a war, they do a lot of things. So, during the First World War, there were some instructions sent to the front, to the soldiers, and it was found that the soldiers were not being able to follow those words, I mean instructions. So, there was a lot of headache and turmoil discussions. It was found that most of the soldiers who went there were of the level of grade 4, and the contents were written by experts, and the words were, the contents were not readable. Okay? So, they were not being able to comprehend what is there in that English. So, they were not being able to follow. Accordingly, some research started, and new things came up, like the readability of a text depends on the length of the word, length of the sentence, complexity of the sentence. At IIT Kharagpur, we did an experiment of doing this with our Bangla texts, that the school goers or Oriya's text, if you try to do, you are most welcome to do that. It was found that those measures were not effective for Indian languages. One simple, there are many other reasons. So, I am mentioning 3 reasons. One is, in our language there is Sandhi, there is Shamas, you know Shamas, right? And there is consonant clusters, what we call Yuktakshar or Judakshars. So, that also makes the difficulty in reading, all right. So, accordingly, the teaching gets hampered. In a very recent seminar at IIM Ahmedabad, one village teacher from Gujarat presented a very interesting case. My PhD student submitted PhD on readability in Bangla at IIT. So, I am an elite, and that gentleman from a Gujarat, who is a Gujarat school teacher in a village, he found that his students were not being able to read. Then he found out that the difficulty was because of the Judakshars, and he rewrote those books avoiding the Judakshars, and could see that the students could pick up. After grade 5, he introduced Judakshars. So, what I did at IIT on paper, this gentleman did at Gujarat village at the grassroots. I congratulated him there. That shows what we can do, what pedagogy is, how we can. Now, suppose I have got in our MOOC repository, in our MIT lecture series, there are lots and lots of documents. Which of these documents, which of these learning objects are suitable for which category of students? Can we annotate that? Can we present that? Can we offer that to the student after an evaluation of the student's level? That is a challenge, and technology can help us to take up the challenge. Okay. So, cognitive classification of contents, classification of students, accordingly we synthesize and design the courseware and testware, and here I would like to put in the data about the students' social status, economic status, performance. All these things should come into a reasoning mechanism. Either you do it in the computer or you do it in your mind, or you do it with some machine, I don't care. But that's something we must be aware of. Now, I come to another term, outcome based education. Often this thing is being told that we have to decide on the outcome. Whenever I go to the class or a particular module I teach, I am supposed to specify that at the end of this course, the student is expected to do this, A, B and C. Might be these are my learning outcomes. Example, the student will be able to solve a simultaneous equation. The student will be able to translate a mathematics problem into a set of equations, etc. And for that, this is my education, the class. At the end of this class or the course material, these learning outcomes should be achieved. Now, for that, these are the expected learning outcome. So, for that, till now we did not consider these things. I would like to introduce these as the inputs. One is the cognitive state of the student, his attention, memory, the background, economic, social, and which generation of learner he is, and also the learning style and approach. Some students like narratives, some students like storytelling, some students like flipped classroom where they like to solve problems themselves. Some students like to do hands-on. Some students like, especially for children, we found it's very effective, games. Using all these, so what is the learning style that is fitting to the need of the student? Based on this, we will have to decide on these lines. These lines are different paths to start from the state and reach at this goal, and these paths are the different pedagogies. These paths are the different ways of teaching, ways of helping, hand-holding the students towards learning. And that is also not sacrosanct. I mentioned about adaptation. Suppose I start teaching in a particular way, and or when I am using, Professor Phatak should excuse me, whenever I am saying teaching, I am talking of the teaching learning process. All right. So, the teaching can be hand-holding with the student purely. You teach, I am sitting by your side. If you get stuck, I will help you. That is also teaching. That is the role of a teacher. Okay. So, while this path is being followed, I find that the student's progress is not that much, and I find that he is getting stuck somewhere because of these reasons. So, I should be able to change my path and adopt a different pedagogy. It often happens, isn't it, that I go on, that we do all the time, that we are teaching, we find, and now we teach a class of 200, 250 students. I clearly remember that when I was allowed to teach up to a class of 50 students, I knew each student by name. I could look at their eyes and could understand how much they are understanding. Whenever I find that he is not understanding, I would immediately hold back and give some examples, isn't it? That you all the time do. That is change of the pedagogy, and that's so much, facilitated by the use of technology, because now we will have a repository of all sorts of learning material which will be annotated, and from where I will be able to select the particular learning material that will be fitted to the student's needs. Moreover, this is my proposition, people may beat me up. I feel that I really don't believe in this sort of grading, frankly speaking. Out of the 10 courses, he has got A in this, B in this, forget about that. Think of, instead of that, I gave them a report card, a nice chart, that these were the learning outcomes. He could achieve these two excellently, and this one he has not been able to achieve to that extent, or might be these two, and this one has been left out. And when he goes to the next course, the teacher looks at that chart and knows which learning outcomes he has achieved, he is still weak. He can solve simultaneous equation, but he is still weak in dealing with fractional calculation. All right. He knows to form simultaneous equation, he knows the mechanism of solving, but always makes mistake in doing some fractional calculation. Then what is needed in the next module is just give him some practice on fraction. Instead, I will say, oh, this guy failed in simultaneous equation, so stay back in class 7. He knew everything except for some weakness. Or repeat, give a supplementary exam. On what? Again we will put same set of questions and again he will do the same mistakes. So we can do this learning, we can decide on which learning outcomes he has achieved and which he has not achieved, and will help to do that. And that again technology can do using computational approach. There are different ways: symbolic reasoning, planning, connectionist approach. I am not going into such technicalities here. I will just show this diagram, what a system that we have developed at IIT Kharagpur. This is an authoring tool, teaching learning method authoring tool. Here is a teacher's GUI. There are teaching material, learning material and test materials. All right. The student, and there are a lot of, there is a repository of contents, and there is a control engine which selects the learning material depending on the student's needs, and we support it with a student's model. And with the student's model, I am not going into details, I can talk about it offline. About the student's model, we try to capture the weak points of the student. Right now, we have undertaken an experiment with TCS, where we are trying to find the correlation between the IQ, the learning style, the learning, self-learning judgment. There are different psychological parameters with the performance of the student. So there are some psychological measures which can tell us where the student is situated, and accordingly we can go ahead with that. So planning means, here what we want to do is that's the thing I was explaining now, is there is a precondition, right? The student is in some state. This operation is my hand holding the teaching process or the teaching learning process. After that, the student will come into a post condition. He didn't know certain things, he will know certain things. Based on that, and that is based on a plan, and the plan will look something like this. I want to reach at these points, and I have got different paths which I can traverse. I can first teach him this, then teach him this, then teach him this, or I can teach him this, then give him this material, or whatever. There are different paths. Now, which path I will select will be decided by the teacher, and we have got a repository of different learning material, and it can be selected from these learning material and can be presented to the student. And accordingly, what will happen is the student will start from a particular state, through a process of teaching learning will achieve some learning outcomes, and accordingly another set of material will be presented to him, and the other learning outcome will be achieved, and ultimately the student will reach to the desired learning outcome. And that is a planning, and this path we can change and adapt. I am sorry. Okay. So that is what we can do. Here is an example of a course structure, but I won't go into these details. I will rather come to some other, I am just skipping this, please excuse me, but here is something that once we have a repository of all the material that you will collect in your course class center, there you have to annotate them along with other things like the language in which the content is, the format, whether there is a text, picture, audio, video, whatever, the type of learning resource, it is an explanation based, application based, exercise based, whatever, grade level, for which grade that is meant, and the hardness and difficulty level, which we can also do in a fuzzy way need not be always a number. We can just say it's a hard, moderate, simple, like that. We have to annotate them. And from there, we can select the material to go ahead. All right. So, a model of a student, a simplistic model given here is based on students' performance and coverage, but as I said, we are now extending this model with the student's IQ, his social scenario, which generation of learner he is, and accordingly we are having some different measures and doing some mathematics, which I am not going into that right now. Instead, I will come to one point that you need to know. Many of you must be knowing, but still I would like to dwell on that for 5-10 minutes. Okay. That is Bloom's taxonomy, formulated by Benjamin Bloom. Basically, he talked about 3 domains: cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. Cognitive domain is, say for example, if I ask you that how do you solve a simultaneous equation, or how do you prove Pythagoras theorem, you can explain that to me, right? You can explain that to me. But if I ask anybody from that side who knows swimming, you know swimming, can you explain to me, can you give me the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, how to swim? I don't know swimming, I want to learn. I will follow those 1, 2, 3 and learn swimming. Can you do that? No, simple swimming, I just want to float. Will you ensure my life? I'll go to water, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe, 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe, I am sure I'll drown. But those who know swimming need not explain, but they will be able to swim. The same thing will happen for cycling, right? So, these are some skills which we learn in the psychomotor domain, and that is learnt as a skill, not declarative, but those are embedded in our mind through practice. All right. So, there are different domains, but say let us start with the cognitive domain. In cognitive domain, this was later modified in 2001 by Bloom's student. So, let us take this. Any content, any teaching that you do, you just try to relate with what you do. Actually, either you ask the students to remember which alphabet is after A, B, all right. Do you analyze to know that? We do not analyze, those are certain things we know. What is the capital of Delhi, capital of India? New Delhi, we know. But another thing is understanding. Delhi is the capital of India is remembering, but where does the Prime Minister hold his office? Answer to that being New Delhi requires some understanding of the concept of capital and the concept of Prime Minister. So, there is understanding. So, some material appeal to the understanding, some material appeal to our applying. Apply your knowledge to achieve this. All right. You have learnt grammar. Using that grammar, write a correct sentence. That is application of your grammar knowledge. Similarly, analyzing. You analyze and say, what will happen if this thing is done? So, each of them are going higher up the cognitive domain, then evaluating, and then creating or synthesis, which is the highest level. When you have understood something, then only you can create something. When you know mechanics, when you have really understood, analyzed, got this capability, you can create. Professor Phatak was talking about the tests, questions that we do, we usually float. Explain what? Answer any 5 questions, What is the name of this? That is actually, what is the name of this is remembering. All right. I do not know, nowadays in CBSE or boards it does not come. Professor Bhattacharya certainly remembers. Our chemistry, a dreadful part was explain what happens when something was given, some chemical is mixed with some chemical, what happens. Unfortunately, very few teachers could help us in analyzing and answering that. Often we tried to remember, but that fetched us very poor marks. We often did mistakes. But the questions we make and the contents that we teach must be focused to, we must be sure about what is my purpose of, what is the purpose of my lecture, what is the purpose of my interaction with the student. It may be, there is no harm that I want the student to remember certain things, but it may be that I am actually trying to see that the student can learn analysis. I am trying to see if the student can compose and synthesize something, what I am trying to do. So, that is important. And similarly, in affective domain, which deals with feelings and attitudes, there is a hierarchy, receiving to the lowest level and characterizing is the highest level. But in the psychomotor action, like swimming, imitation is the lowest level. You swim, I see, I do swim, I do say 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe. So, I try to imitate. Gradually, I manipulate, I go in increased precision, articulate, and then the thing become naturalized. So, that is how some skills are learned. So, these are different hierarchies. Now, I will conclude with some thoughts on testing and evaluation. Before that, I would like to say that the contents that you will be preparing, let those be annotated with the taxonomic level, what you are trying to address. And also when you test, we have just started this research activity at IIT Kharagpur. 3 of my PhD students are working on different aspects of this, but I am just to this august audience who are themselves researchers, I would like to pose some problems. The problems are, can we do something to see that I have got some learning outcome? I want the student should be able to do this, or student should learn this, and I prescribe a textbook or a learning object taken from the internet. Can we test that the text content of the learning object satisfy the learning outcome? How can we do that? The second one would be, which level of does the test really test the learning outcome? Am I really testing whether he can analyze? Does the test address a particular part of Bloom's taxonomy? For example, if I had made the question paper or test in such a way that I am testing his remembering, analyzing, all those levels, and I find a student is a little poor in remembering, but he is very good at analyzing. A student is a little poor in analyzing, but he is very creative and can synthesize. It always happens that some people cannot really solve the mechanics problem, but can make a nice car. That is often we see. Won't we credit them? Shouldn't there be a means to again have that chart where I say that he is weak in this part of the taxonomy, but he is very strong in these features? Can we design the text? Suppose there are 7 questions or 10 questions, 2 of them addressing to analysis, 2 of them to synthesis, 3 of them to remembering. I just come up with a result that he is 2 out of 3 in remembering, 2 out of 2 in synthesis, 1 out of 2 in analysis. That would give me a much better idea than saying that this student 50%, his CGPA is 6.5, his CGPA is 7.2, that really doesn't mean anything. It's just because of what Professor Phatak said, is a scale problem, and because we are not being able to match with the scale, we are diluting and making our life easy. If we have to really keep the quality along with scale up, then we have to take recourse to technology where we will have to address this. And can we, the technology enabled teaching learning process, we should think, can we automatically generate the tests? Can we automatically evaluate not only MCQs? MCQs are becoming rampant, and a joke is going on in IIT Kharagpur that if the student is asked what is your father's name, he stops and says, give me choices, sir, ABC. So, that is not the only way. We are taking recourse to MCQ because we do not have the time to evaluate. But research will certainly is yielding result in automatically evaluating short answers. It will also very soon, I am sure, will yield result in evaluating relatively long answers. So, I look forward to those days. With that, I stop. If there are some questions, I am ready to take it. Yes.
Sir, the class size becoming a big problem, like as you have already pointed out in the earlier days when we were teaching 30s, 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
and we are having a one-to-one contact.
Right.
But the class sizes are becoming larger and larger.
Right.
So I think this branded books and all these things will come into our rescue.
Yes, that's
But,
why.
How effectively? That is my concern.
No, you see, I mean, say the class size is certainly becoming a problem, and we are not being able to, let us admit that we are not being able to deliver quality education. At least when I come out of the class now, I know that I could not possibly do eye contact with the last row even once, right, and that keeps me dissatisfied. Now, the point is, if there are different ways and means, suppose these 150 students are broken up into groups, and they are, I just say there cannot be any monolithic structure. I am against such structuring, and I will not give you any structure. This will totally be dependent on the innovativeness of the teacher. Maybe you can say that, okay, this category of the students, let you first go through this material, and then you can have short flipped classrooms like that. So, there this recorded material, not only recorded, I want to add a couple of things: recorded, annotated, graded material. Along with that, I may do some experiments, some games I can play in a class of 150 students, and can categorize them by using a computer program that they are in this level, this category, say categories of say approximately 20 students, for say 5 categories. Then I can accordingly arrange, not my lecture, my job is that of an artist now, right. For these I will suggest that, or ultimately a computer will suggest, forget it, that now me as a teacher I will just make a chart that you first go through this, come up with this quiz which I will conduct, and I will conduct that quiz and see that the shoe is pinching here, and then for those 20 students I will, or say for whom the shoe is pinching 5 students, then I will suggest some other material. Let them read. I can speak English, he can also speak English. So, it is not necessary that I will be going there and giving the lecture. My job is that of a handholder, a pedagogue. I will adapt the pedagogy. I will tell the students, you go through this and let the students participate. There is one university is there in Sweden, University of Aalborg, where the only method they adopt is problem based learning, no lectures. Teachers come and give them some problems. Of course, the number of students are less, but so however that does not matter. They give the problems and the teacher is available, the students do the problems, get stuck and say comes and says, so what to do, Prof. He says, okay, you go through this. If you can't understand, come to me. In that way, the students learn. Our job is hand-holding with the help of technology. So, once again I would say annotation, adaptation is very important. Yes, please.
In addition, sir, like the class is divided into two types of students. Like I also agree with you that no student is bad. Everybody is
Right.
having the potential to learn, but having the potential to learn in different way and different pace.
Yes.
So when we are teaching in a class of 100 or 150, like the pace of the learners are different.
Yes.
That also, in fact, makes us slightly like we are
You feel desperate,
yeah.
right? How do I finish the course?
No, not finishing the course.
Then
And we are also limited to approach, like because there is one blend of students who can understand very fast, who understand very late.
right.
So we are limited by those kind of teaching methodologies, like which will actually suit to both, because it do not have the difference.
You cannot have two things which will suit, one thing that will suit to both. You will have to take two things. You may have to take four things. And the problem is, I mean, the pace, right? So we have to make several changes. The structure that has been imposed on us, there is a time that the teachers make the revolt that we will teach in this way. And autonomous institutions allow us that. Professor Sarangi, I am sure will allow you that. That you take a new thing, way of evaluation, but let it be very honest, sincere and systematic. That is very important. Otherwise, anarchy will prevail.
One prescription is, in the, as Professor Maggi told, in the class of 120 or 150, these teachers should not, in a impression or a confidence that the teaching should go each and every student. He has to compromise certain portion of the student. Otherwise, those who work up with the subject, they will feel low.
I know that is in the present system.
You should not take a confirmation.
No, what you are saying,
Should go each
no,
and
no,
every student.
Professor Maggi, what Professor Maggi has said and you have also said is in relation to the lecture mode of teaching. When you are teaching in the lecture mode in a gallery of 150 students, I am saying that with the technology enabled thing, we can break out from this lecture mode. The lectures are given. I am saying that you go through this and this will be a discussion class. All right. And I have specified, I have identified that these students will not be enjoying this lecture. For them, that lecture will be better. I have prescribed that to them. Okay, I have given them time. 1 week, next week I am meeting. And then me with my TAs can cater to them. The same learning outcome they are supposed to arrive at with different paths. I have just given them the pointers to the different paths, evaluating their standing. And now I will do that and evaluation. Yes.
I'd like to add one more thing. In our experiment, we did two things. While you are right that we will not be able to reach to everybody, but one experiment, two things we did is that the teaching assistant were supposed to spot weaker students and stronger students. And we used to hold an extra class really for both groups. For weaker students to explain them individually, but for stronger students to challenge them.
You should segregate them for other tutorial or something. Because the philosopher told,
The segregation
you
is
will be
not,
lost if you.
no, the segregation is not generic, it is topic dependent. In one topic, I might find one student weaker, in another topic, there may be another student weaker. The second thing we did is, because the students are most worried about failing in a course. So we said that in this quiz evaluation, at the time of around mid-sem and beyond, we announced it earlier, that all students who do not score a minimum 40% marks, because we had announced 40% as passing mark, we said all such students will be given an extra compensatory test. It will be a 100-mark test. But even if they score 70 or 80, their count will be only up to 40. That means everybody was permitted to attempt to pass the exam much before the final exam. So this helped us to take the fear out of their mind. And as Professor Anupam says, we need a lot of good TAs for doing this.
Yes, of course.
Teaching assistants are required, and that is something that we can afford because we have some postgraduate students. By the way, in IIT Bombay, we also regularly appoint senior undergraduate students as TAs. And many times they do a good job because they can relate to the students easily. But this has to be pre-designed. Means we have to design this earlier that this question will give. We have to conduct a class for the TAs on how this discussion session will happen. Enough ghodagiri that is to be done. But the impact is discernible. You can feel that all individual students benefit. I had one question. Is there any material on training us teachers on how to annotate and how to grade the material? Because that that does not come naturally.
No, and I mean that is manual.
Correct.
But we have got tools by which the annotation can be done.
But even manually, are there any books or material which tells us how to do this annotation?
How to do this annotation? I mean,
examples that this is an unannotated thing and this is how after annotation.
Oh, that is there. Annotation standards are there. I was showing. I think I missed the slide. There are IEEE LOM standard.
I see.
IEEE LOM. Learning object material. Okay. And IEEE, I think, SCORM, SCORM.
Yeah.
SCORM and LOM are two standard protocols, but that does not have the difficulty level of the contents which we added. In our system, we have added a couple of things like the difficulty and the language.
Oh, that is what you mean by graded this thing.
Yeah, I mean this thing is for this grade,
right.
Like that, and language, because India being a multilingual, we have got the language and all those.
See, this is one problem which we face, and I think our colleagues here will also face. Unlike in other disciplines, where other areas, where suppose I employ a person, I give him some basic training. We teachers are the only unfortunate jokers in life who are just appointed and are told to teach. Now, this kind of training should be perhaps, means there has to be some organization, all new people, old people. I learned these things from many of my younger colleagues who work in the educational technology domain. But ordinarily, we are not used to this.
I think the notion of B.Ed education should change now.
Yeah.
It should be technology-enabled B.Ed also. Otherwise, where we teach, I mean, the large number of teachers.
I have one suggestion, Prof Basu. Can you make a capsule of a MOOC? Okay, just a 6 to 8 hour capsule, small lectures and these things, where you will also go through, for example, the taxonomy that you have or the IEEE LOM. Now, this could be a self-learning material for every teacher.
Good session. We can do that.
Every teacher could go through that.
We can do that.
And Professor Sarangi and other directors could make it obligatory that every teacher should look at over this weekend, should go through this lecture. और बाद में मैं एक quiz लेगा सबके लिए, whether you understood or not.
No, that's possible. Certainly we can do that.
Because we have slogged our skin out through these things, but it could be helpful.
Yes.
ऐसा आप बनाएंगे.
ठीक है.
All right. I announce proudly Professor Anupam Basu's first short MOOCs on the pedagogy of teaching in the modern.
And there will be takers, right?
Yeah.
Takers.
And you will also have to design a quiz for all of us.
Okay, sure. Thank you. If there are no other questions.